Hi, my name is Graham Slingbaum. I'm a solutions engineer here on the U.S. federal team at CyberArk. Today, we wanted to discuss an identity security approach to the zero trust mindset. Traditional perimeter security involved basically deciding who the good guys were and keeping the bad guys out. Trust was defined at the network perimeter, and tools that were created that perimeter were things such as network devices, firewalls, VPNs, web gateways, and they would basically keep out the untrusted users. Basically, these became increasingly sophisticated, but then so did the attack vectors. So whether we could detect patterns, detect alert on suspicious activities, we still had a number of folks getting in. And once they got in, they had that trust and access to anything that was on your network. Nowadays, I'm sure most of you are more concerned with email attacks, phishing emails, malware, ransomware getting into your network than keeping folks out through your complex and expensive firewalls. In addition to the threat landscape changing, our own network infrastructure has changed quite a bit as we've moved from mobile, cloud, digital, as well as an increasingly remote workforce, especially during the pandemic. Additionally, folks that we didn't used to consider privilege assets before maybe have access to tools that require elevated privileges, such as HR systems on a SaaS platform, finance systems, or even DevOps pipelines and non-human entities that are using credentials and have to have an implicit level of trust to get their day-to-day job done. So how do we deal with this sprawl? Well, the first thing we do is we adopt an assume breach mentality. So basically, we take into account that there are lots of identities out there, but we don't want to assume that these identities can be trusted. Instead, we have to place controls around them. These controls have meant that identity has become the new perimeter. So when we used to treat our firewall as the edge of our network, now it's as soon as that user has to make themselves known, that is the new perimeter. So the controls that we put into place need to take into account both the context of that identity, the risk level of what they're accessing, as well as just enough privilege, whether that's from a least privilege approach, reducing the over-privileging of accounts, or from a just-in-time, only reducing standing access and limiting when a user or identity is able to connect. So let's take a look at the pillars of zero trust. The first, verify every identity. So this includes both humans and non-humans and is not a one-time deal. Just because something was trusted once doesn't mean it is the same identity the next time they try to validate. The second is validating every device. So this basically reduces the attack surface to only known and protected devices and controlling the privilege on those devices as well. The third falls under that broadly scoped least privilege and just-in-time perspective, where we can intelligently limit privilege by reducing what a user can do with the identity that they've logged in with. And then finally, we need to take away the fact that we've been resting on our laurels in some cases. We put security places in place, or security controls in place, and we trust that they've gotten the job done. Instead, we need to monitor, analyze, and adapt to increased risk, which isn't necessarily due to brand new threats. It could also just be to our change in our own infrastructure, whether we've built out complex DevOps pipelines, moved to the cloud, or put in automated processes. We still need to apply these principles of zero trust to those tools as well. From CyberArk's perspective, the identity security discussion has to center on privilege. Privilege is what is used to bypass your security barriers, as well as to elevate within your network to execute those advanced cyber threats. So how do we do that? So notice on this slide, we've talked about identity as all those different users and non-human users that we've talked about, from your admins to your robots to your third-party access, and even in some cases to your customers. We then take into account all the different places those may be located, whether in a hybrid, cloud, on-prem, SaaS-based platforms, wherever. But the concept here is that we can treat those identities the same way. Once we've identified who they are and what they're connecting to, the principles that we put into place to protect those identities are the same. Let's go through those identities very quickly. The first is to authenticate. that obviously applies to multi-factor authentication, verifying those users and the devices that they're connecting from. The second falls under authorization, which talks back to our least privilege discussion and just-in-time access. The third, controlling the access, meaning isolating the privileged sessions and the methods that we use to connect from other activities that may be accomplished within that user's workstation or environment. And this ties deeply into our fourth pillar, which is auditing. So basically the ability to, in some cases, have session recordings, but definitely to have audit logs for any activity that an identity is using, whether it's from that authentication to what they're accessing, and then be able to take action in real time based on that audit. So how does this tie back into the DoD world? So recently the DoD, the DISA in conjunction with the NSA released this zero trust reference architecture. And I think to many folks, the easy thing to do would be to buy a tool, solve zero trust, problem solved. I think what this makes very clear is zero trust is a complicated problem, and very few vendors, if any, are going to be able to solve zero trust for you. So where we think CyberArk falls with the zero trust mindset is mostly on the left side here. It falls under the authentication and authorization pieces, multi-factor authentication, controlling least privilege and just-in-time, as well as the event detection and response in those privileged sessions. We also, on the bottom left, can provide an enterprise federated identity provider or a single sign-on mechanism for an organization, and even in some cases for customers. And then the last is that integration, our bidirectional integration with a logging tool like Splunk, for example, that can do complex behavioral analysis and identify those threats while they're in progress before it becomes a forensic issue. So CyberArk's products can basically be lumped into three buckets. The first is the access side, which is not just privilege access, but also the workforce identity and customer identity management, which falls under the multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, as well as provisioning access to many different tools. The center pillar is privilege, which is the bread and butter of what CyberArk does. On the top left, we have our endpoint privilege manager, which is installed on workstations and servers to basically remove built-in administrator accounts and granularly give back privilege to the users and identities that need it. Our vendor privilege access manager is a remote access capability, which is used for remote users as well as third-party users who may need limited access without the need for a VPN in place. Our privilege access manager is the core solution to CyberArk. It's used to vault and rotate credentials, create session isolation, and prevent lateral and vertical movement, as well as take action on suspicious activities. The Cloud Entitlements Manager is a newer offering of CyberArk, which can reduce the overall privilege and provide remediations for overprivileged accounts in both Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud. And then finally, the DevSecOps bucket, which falls under the Secrets Manager portfolio for CyberArk, which can handle both container orchestration workflows, ephemeral containers and servers that are stood up in cloud environments that have API keys or secrets that need to be managed and then thrown away, as well as those tools like security scanners, Tenable Nessus, for example, or ServiceNow discovery tools that are those non-human entities that need to connect and retrieve credentials. You can see more of those integrations on marketplace.cyberark.com. This is a lot to talk about in just 10 minutes, but hopefully this has spurred some thought and some further conversations. Please feel free to reach out to go deeper on any of these products that you think could help secure your organization. Thank you so much and have a great day.